NASCAR has seen its fair share of controversies over the years. Recently, though, an incident at Martinsville Speedway has stirred up a new level of debate and frustration. But the penalties didn't impact every team involved equally, leaving teams and drivers questioning NASCAR's consistency and decision-making. And now in today's episode, we're diving deep into what led to these shocking penalties and why some teams believe the punishment is unfair. This particular controversy centers around the outcome of the Martinsville Cup race, which held significant stakes for many of the competitors. With the playoff race heating up, every position, every lap, and every point was critical for the drivers aiming to secure their spot in the championship four. In the final moments of the race, Christopher Bell, one of the top contenders, was caught in a struggle to earn a valuable spot, while William Byron held a narrow lead in the playoff standings. The situation was already intense, but what unfolded next was something unexpected and, according to NASCAR, potentially unethical. NASCAR officials reviewed radio communications from the number 23 Toyota of Bubba Wallace, the number 3 Chevrolet of Austin Dillon, and the number 1 Chevrolet of Ross Chastain, all of whom were not directly in contention for the championship four, but were racing in the playoff race. After the race, NASCAR concluded that these teams had, in effect, collaborated to protect William Byron's position on the track, keeping him safe from other competitors and aiding his path to the next playoff round. Following a review, NASCAR issued fines and penalties aimed at punishing these actions, but fans in the wider racing world were left confused because none of the playoff drivers received any penalties, apart from a single exception involving Christopher Bell. The penalties handed down by NASCAR included a $100,000 fine for each of the three teams, along with a loss of 50 driver and owner points. Perhaps the most impactful part of these penalties, though, was the suspension of the crew chiefs, spotters, and senior team officials for each team involved. While NASCAR has strict guidelines and penalties in place for actions that could compromise the fairness of races, the decision to penalize only certain drivers and teams created a wave of confusion. Fans, analysts, and even members of the racing teams felt that the ruling was inconsistent. Playoff drivers, after all, are usually held to the same standards as everyone else on the track. But in this case, the playoff drivers themselves were left largely untouched, except for Bell, who was demoted from the fourth playoff spot, allowing Byron to advance. Why were some teams penalized while others, particularly those still in the playoffs, weren't? To understand the motivations behind NASCAR's actions, it's essential to look at the final laps at Martinsville. In the last moments of the race, Bell was struggling to keep up and was even a lap down, with Byron just ahead, but also facing challenges due to his worn-out tires. The points gap between Bell and Byron was incredibly close, with Byron holding a slim 1-point advantage. In what appeared to be a strategic move, Dillon and Chastain maneuvered their cars in a way that effectively blocked any threats to Byron's position, forming a moving barrier behind him and preventing other cars from overtaking him. While this was happening, Wallace was also racing close by but suddenly slowed down, reporting a suspected tire problem over the radio, which was later found to be unfounded by his spotter. The radio communications between these teams were revealing. At one point, the number 3 team, which included Austin Dillon, openly questioned over the radio whether the number 1 car, driven by Chastain, understood the deal. Shortly afterward, Dillon's team instructed their crew chief to communicate with Chastain's crew chief, which was interpreted as a way to confirm their collaborative approach on the track. Meanwhile, Wallace, who was ahead of Bell by nearly a half a lap, experienced a sudden drop in speed and radioed that he was having tire issues, even though his spotter later said the tires were fine.
10-4, does the 1 crew chief know the deal?
Yeah, he should. Nice and far with the 24 here down there, door. 24 is 1 to the good, 1 point to the good, down there even. 6 is lined up with the 3.
Off the pace, down into turn 3, the 20 goes by him. Almost lost it. And then almost lost it.
I think I got a tire going down.
10-4, just nurse it home, nurse it home. Hold it up top, coming to the white.
NASCAR Senior Vice President of Competition Elton Sawyer hinted that future instances of race manipulation could lead to driver suspensions. Sawyer explained that NASCAR's choice to penalize the team leadership rather than the drivers was meant to send a message. but he emphasized that NASCAR would not hesitate to take harsher action against drivers if similar behavior continued. By penalizing the team officials rather than the drivers themselves, NASCAR may have sent a signal that it's unwilling to take stronger action against high-profile drivers in playoff contention, even if it means compromising the sport's principles. Some fans and industry insiders feel that NASCAR's penalties are not enough to prevent similar incidents in the future. Jeff Gluck, a well-known NASCAR journalist, expressed his views on social media. According to Gluck, the outcome in Martinsville failed the eye test. The penalties handed down weren't substantial enough to send a clear message to the teams and drivers about what is and isn't acceptable. In his opinion, NASCAR will likely face more instances of race manipulation because the punishments were not strict enough to change the behavior of the teams and drivers who might consider taking similar actions. The teams themselves have not accepted NASCAR's ruling without pushback. Shortly after the penalties were announced, 23XI Racing, Trackhouse Racing, and Richard Childress Racing each declared that they would appeal the decision. Their argument is that they did not commit any violations and that the penalties were unwarranted. NASCAR has promised to expedite the appeals process, and the teams are hopeful that they can overturn the penalties. The appeals are expected to be heard before the next race, which means a ruling could come swiftly. But overturning these penalties would be a challenging feat for the teams involved, given that they would need to prove that no violation of NASCAR's code of conduct took place. The timing of these penalties is also significant because they come just before the final race of the season, which will determine the championship winner. With so much on the line, the intensity surrounding the playoff race is at an all-time high. Fans are left wondering whether NASCAR's approach to penalties will change in the future, or if this kind of selective enforcement will continue. If NASCAR is truly committed to preserving the integrity of the sport, they may need to reconsider how they handle similar situations going forward. The situation in Martinsville has ignited a larger conversation about what it means to play fair in NASCAR. In most sports, team members support each other, and NASCAR is no exception. Drivers from the same manufacturer often work together, just as teammates in other sports might strategize to ensure the best possible outcome. However, what happened in Martinsville crossed the line, according to NASCAR, because the actions were allegedly premeditated and organized through team communication rather than occurring organically on the track. In the final lap, the intensity reached its peak. William Byron, clinging to a slim lead, was at risk of being overtaken by Bell, who desperately needed the points to advance. With the help of Chastain and Dillon, Byron managed to maintain his position, benefiting from the blockade they had formed. Meanwhile, Bell made an effort to gain ground but ended up brushing against the wall in a dramatic maneuver, an action that ultimately led NASCAR to penalize him as well. This demotion pushed him out of the top four, making way for Byron to secure a spot in the championship four. After the race, fans were left with mixed feelings. Some sympathized with Bell, who seemed to be disadvantaged by the actions of others. Others felt that NASCAR's penalties were justified, arguing that the behavior of the non-playoff drivers compromised the integrity of the competition. Now, whatever your thoughts are, write them down below. And while you're down there, make sure to smash that subscribe button for more upcoming videos.